Welcome to the High Pressure Podcast with me, George Rotterman.
And me, Marie Williams. Brought to you by Reliably Ratterman.
Bringing you industry news and trends.
Plus, insightful conversations with industry leaders.
Let's get to today's show. Well, Marie, today is going to be an exciting day on the High Pressure Podcast. We are going to talk about stuff that can lift you and take you around the world. So what do you think about today's podcast with Phil Kornbluth?
I think it's going to be excellent. I also think it's very timely with the holidays around the corner, with all the balloons that are filled up with what we're going to be talking about today. I'm excited, George.
It's interesting you say that. I cannot watch a single holiday Thanksgiving parade at Macy's Parade without thinking about Phil, because I see all that helium and all those amazing images up in the sky. So, Phil, welcome to the High Pressure Podcast.
Thank you, George. Thanks, Marie. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and welcome back, actually, because we did an episode with you, or you and George spoke on the High Pressure Podcast in 2020, which was a wild time across the globe. And we dove into what was going on with helium then. So this is going to be a great follow-up to see where we're at.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. This is great. Okay, so man, so many things are happening in the helium market. There's a lot of information out there. You can just YouTube it. You can see all kinds of people talking about how we're going to run out of helium, and other people say, oh my gosh, we're not running out of helium, and all the different things going on. So I think distributors have dealt with allocations. We've got some new applications using helium, and there's all kinds of new things happening around the world trying to find helium. So maybe a good spot to start with is, what you are sort of seeing today is just a right now kind of current trend happening in the helium market.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the real short answer to that question is that the supply is plentiful right now. There are certain parts of the world where there's clearly oversupply. Really the shortage came to an end around the end of last year, the end of 2023. All of the allocations were lifted by the end of first quarter, and it's a very different market than it was a year ago.
Hey, Phil, what was the thing that made it go so quick from like allocations to plentiful helium?
Yeah, well, the single biggest thing I would say is the new production from the Gazprom project in Siberia, the Amur project. It only added about 10% to global capacity, but that 10% combined with a relatively weak demand from the electronics market was enough to flip the market from what had been a decreasing shortage or a tightly balanced market to a market where supply feels easy to get, plentiful. Those are the main things. But the other things are, we escaped some of the negatives that we'd experienced during the shortage. Like we had a long shutdown of the BLM system, a 6-month shutdown and things like that. We've still had some of those types of events, but they haven't been as severe recently. And, the BLM has run well since Messer took it over. There was a little bit of a shutdown just recently. There was a 9-day shutdown, but a 9-day shutdown compared to a 6-month shutdown is a whole different thing.
So we talk about where we're at now. What do you think when we look here in the future, when distributors are saying, okay, where's that landscape look for me? We've already been kind of through a situation where we had an allocation, a shortage. We had to go to customers and tell them they could only get a certain percentage. They had to make some decisions, which also makes me think of one other thing. Has capturing helium have much of an effect on the marketplace? I know it became a big thing to try to recapture helium after it's been used so you could recycle it back through your process, whether it be leak checking, things like that. Would you mind touching on that? Was there really a lot of opportunity there for distributors or for customers?
Recycling has become a bigger thing because to recycle helium, you have to make an investment in capital equipment, and that equipment has an operating cost, et cetera, and a maintenance cost, et cetera. So, the higher the price of helium goes, the easier it is to justify that investment by saving helium molecules. So, as prices have gotten progressively much higher over the years, as we've had a series of shortages over the last 20 years or so, there has been more investment in recycling. Now, I would say that the big the real big targets for recycling have been harvested already. So, like the MRI magnet manufacturers, people are saving hundreds of millions of feet a year of helium by recycling the helium at places like GE's facility in Florence, South Carolina. And so yeah, there is a there's been a significant savings and for certain applications. MRI was a big one. Optical fiber manufacturing also a pretty big one. There has been quite a bit of recycling activity, and that's one of the reasons why demand for helium, demand for virgin helium, has not really increased in quite a while. So it's not
Yeah.
that it's just that people are recovering a lot of it. But I do think the easy targets have been already the low fruit's been harvested.
Yeah.
You asked about well, where to from here? What's the trend look like going forward? Well, the first thing I want to say is that I don't have a perfect crystal ball like everybody else. It's people always want forecasts and projections, but there's always caveats that things go wrong, things don't go according to plan. But what I would say is that going forward, if you look at what's out there in the market, the pipeline of new supply looks pretty full, like pretty robust, and demand growth looks like it will be modest. We're hoping. I mean, obviously, people want growth, and we're hoping for good growth from the semiconductor industry. We're hoping for good growth from the aerospace industry. The MRI application is shrinking, so that offsets some of the growth. Uh, so we have a scenario with quite a bit of new supply on the horizon, and single digit, relatively low single digit demand growth. So really, as far out as I can see, the baseline looks like plentiful supply. Now, because of that, there's a good chance some projects will be delayed, some projects might be canceled, etc. So markets have a way of adjusting, and just
Yeah.
like prices going way up reduce demand. If prices come down significantly, that could help demand. So, so what I would say, the way I like to characterize it is, it looks like supply is going to be plentiful,
Yeah.
but the supply chain also looks like it's going to remain fragile. So there's a number of things that can go wrong, and that outlook could be wrong by a lot. It could be wrong soon. And as an example, just a couple of examples, you have Messer and Air Products who are still in legal legal haggling over the crude helium enrichment unit, which is integral to the BLM system. And depending on how things play out, there could be an extended shutdown of the BLM system, for instance. Uh, last time I checked, Israel and Iran were not great buddies, and if we had a major war in the Middle East that impacted LNG production in Qatar, which is not a high probability, but it's a non-zero probability. Well, Qatar produces around a third of the world's helium, so
Yeah.
if you had a disruption there, it would be a major event. And then the other thing I would say is that most of the world's helium is still produced as a byproduct of hydrocarbon processing. And, some of these plants have blown up in the past. So, you take a major plant out
Yeah.
of production,
Right.
And that changes the scenario as well. So,
That's a great point. So we got all the different variables that could make a supply chain. So if you're a distributor, you do definitely need to be thinking about those things could happen and what's your plan B or plan C, depending on if those happen. I had something that I thought was so exciting that they found what's supposed to be the largest helium reserve potentially right there in Minnesota. And they say it's supposed to be like a 12.4% quality, where a lot of times in natural gas you get with 3 or 4%, out. So that's pretty exciting. I don't know, but there's some debate if they can get it out of the ground. They know it's there now, but they don't know if for sure they can get it out.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the company you're referring to is Pulsar.
Pulsar,
I'm not I'm not inclined to either tout anybody's stock or downgrade their stock. They're a publicly traded company, but what I would say is that there's too much emphasis in the media on the helium concentration in a natural gas find, or as opposed to the total amount of helium. So you can have very high concentrations of helium, but if you don't have a large quantity of gas, it could still be a relatively small helium find. Conversely, if you have a very large amount of gas with a low helium concentration, it could still be a huge helium find. So, for instance, Exxon, who operates one of the largest helium plants in the world in Wyoming, their gas only has 0.6% helium in it, but they have huge amounts of gas. That's a forever resource. Forever doesn't mean forever literally, but it means I'm going to be dead. My kids are going to be dead, and maybe their kids will be dead, but definitely I'll be dead. My kids are dead before that runs out. So I call that forever. I don't care about stuff that's going to run out in 100 years or 70 years or something like that. Right. But the same thing with Qatar. The field that supplies Qatar, the North Field, that has something like 5.5% helium in it. I mean, it's got a really low helium concentration, but during the production of LNG, that helium gets concentrated in the waste gas, and there's enough of concentration and enough total helium to support, what's going to be is over 2 BCF of production, headed towards over 3 BCF by 2027 or 2028. So too much emphasis on the helium concentration as opposed to the total reserve of helium.
Yeah. Okay. So, Marie, the good news is you're going to have helium for your life, and your children's are going to have helium for their life. So we don't know for sure after that. But that's
I think Marie's children too.
Okay.
Perfect. I like that. I do have a question around, I guess, the future of helium in one way, or maybe where we're currently at, looking at 2025. So I would assume that since there was a lack of helium the past few years, and it was really difficult to access or very expensive to access from a consumer side, that technologies had to advance. Like you're saying, the MRI machines aren't using as much helium as before, right? So if I was a distributor looking at 2025, what are the markets that aren't going to be utilizing helium as much as they were in the past? And what are the markets that I should be looking at for growth with helium?
Well, that's a kind of a tough question. I think the welding application, which has always been a significant application for helium, my understanding is that is an application where there's been some substitution, and helium is used less frequently, as a component of a welding mixture than it was a few shortages ago, because while you might have better welds with helium in some cases, you can still have good welds with other gases. So that's an example, unfortunately, of a place where there's probably a negative. In MRI, clearly, that's probably the best example of technology advancements where the usage of helium is per machine or per scanner is way down from what it used to be, and that's not going to reverse. I think leak detection helium is still a good application for helium. The chip industry is going to grow a lot, but I don't, and chip semicon manufacturing clearly is going to be, if it isn't already, the leading application for helium, and it's also going to be a growth area in the United States because of the reshoring of chip manufacturing and the CHIPS Act and all that sort of stuff. Uh, but that's a difficult application for distributors to benefit from, mainly because the requirements of the chip manufacturers are so stringent that, and they also require so many different products that I think that's probably a sector that's going to be dominated by the majors. And I would say, kind of the same thing for the aerospace industry. Uh, Certainly gas chromatography and the analytical application, that's going to, I think, stay strong. I think helium's the preferred carrier gas over hydrogen. I think the party balloon sector is healthy. I know there's voices out there that talk about, how can you waste this precious resource on party balloons? Uh, Again, that is uh, thinking that grew out of four shortages, but I think helium's going to be a plentiful resource for a while, and I'm not I'm not in the camp where you say, well, don't use helium for party balloons. I would say let the markets decide what you use helium for, and if it became if it went back in short supply and prices went up, then the demand for helium would naturally for party balloons would naturally go down. And if it's plentiful, let people use it for party balloons.
It does. You're right about that, Phil. It gets a tremendous amount of press, almost from an ethics, like how could we possibly be using this for party balloons? Yet party balloon helium usage is around 8% of the full usage of helium. So it's not the larger usage of helium, but there's a lot of belief, like, oh my gosh, we don't have helium, we won't be able to do all these things in the universe that we need to do.
Yeah, one of the things I would say is that the public perception of, and I would assume this applies to other businesses and other gases, but the public perception of what's going on in the helium business tends to lag reality by at least a year. So, a lot of people still think there's a helium shortage, and there hasn't been a helium shortage for a year. Um, the Partly to blame for that, there are all these startup companies who are out there raising money. Uh, some of them have established nice business models. I would say North American Helium in Canada, they're producing over 200 million feet a year now, and they have a really nice business model. Capital Operating Group is a pretty big producer in the Southwest. ICX is an established producer, and you have a number of other smaller ones. Desert Eagle, Entech. There's a number of small producers, but many companies have gone public. There's over 20 that have IPO'd, and they're constantly in money raising mode. And it makes for a lot better press release if you're talking about shortages and high prices than if you're talking about plentiful supply and prices that are declining.
Yeah.
So, it's
a great point.
That feeds the public perception that's outdated. It's because it's in those companies' interest to do that.
So, Marie, we're talking about you, your children, your children's children. Something I look at, this just excites the heck out of me, because I think, wow, so we all have heard a lot about fusion, and the technologies come around to where they truly can do fusion. Actually, in our little town, Livermore, California, they've done it over here at Lawrence Livermore Lab. But now there's some folks that are really found a way to do this, and they say in a production way, it's supposed to be coming out here in the next couple of years. I think there's a plant right now being built that can really have the ability to do that. And one of the materials they're talking about is helium-3.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty interesting because it sounds a little sci-fi, but helium-3 is very plentiful on the moon. and could be mined and brought back and used it for fusion. And of course, fusion, and once you got fusion and endless power, there's an amazing amount of things you could do, getting water and making nice clean water, making hydrogen, all kinds of cool things. I just want to get your thoughts on hydrogen, helium-3.
Well, okay. So I'll start out by saying I'm not an expert on helium-3 because it's a kind of a different business than industrial helium. So I know just enough to be dangerous.
Okay.
But what I would say is that it's an isotope business, so it's more along the lines of spec gases and isotopes. There's only a few places in the world that manufacture it. Tennessee Valley Authority is one of the manufacturers. I know there's in Russia, there's one or two places where they manufacture it. It's extremely rare on Earth. It's again, you take regular old helium and you can separate the helium-3 with centrifuges and things like that. And it's a very high-priced commodity. I know the Department of Homeland Security uses it to look for bad things at the ports, coming in at the ports, and those sorts of things. I would put that on the list of not in my lifetime, not in your lifetime, maybe in Marie's lifetime. So if we're if that's one way of characterizing things, Now you touched on fusion as well. So fusion has been the holy grail of energy production for quite a while, and I've been in this business in the helium business now for 41 years, and in one way or another, full time, much of the time, not always full time. And one of the first accounts that I was involved in signing with a good friend of mine by the name of Mike Gentile, way back in the day, was the Takamak. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but the Takamak research at Princeton University, where they were using liquid helium to cool the magnets to confine the plasma that they were, heating to these extreme temperatures where, fusion can take place.
Yeah.
So, it's been around for a long time, and and yes, they have made some recent breakthroughs, but I still think they have a long way to go to get to, where there's like a commercial fusion reactor producing power. So, and it is an application. We talk about MRI as an application for helium, but really the application, if you broaden it a little bit, is helium that's used to cool superconducting magnets, and that's the application for fusion, and it's also the application at physics research facilities like Fermi Labs, Brookhaven Labs, CERN in Europe, and things like that. So it was, you probably remember hearing about the superconducting supercollider that never made it to the finish line. But yeah, that's a superconducting magnet application for helium, and it's an interesting application, and someday hopefully we'll see fusion energy.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Phil, is it more today possibly going to happen similar to the beta VHS? It may go that way, may not, but it looks like there's a real trend to go to cold plates and get away from fans for all the different data storage centers. But there's also been a lot of talk about using liquid helium to bring to everything to a semiconductor state to be able to have amazingly fast operating data centers to do tremendous amount of computations and stuff. Have you heard much about that? Because there's been a lot of talk about utilizing helium for those applications.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't consider myself an expert in the some of these high tech areas at all, but I am aware that that there's talk about using helium for cooling at some of these big data centers, and the one thing that is a positive about helium. And I would say this, my experience going back into the 1980s when MRI was a new thing and optical fiber was a new thing. that helium is a high tech gas. I do believe that there will be. It has, a number of unique properties. I do believe that somewhere in laboratories there are people working on, exciting new applications for helium, and that some of them could turn out to be the next MRI or the next optical fiber. And that, I'm not one of those people who say, well, okay, everything that you can use helium for has already been invented, and we're only going to, become more efficient and use less. I'm confident there's going to be new applications, and I'm hopeful for the health of the business that some of them will be big and will absorb, some of this new supply that I see coming into the market.
Yeah, that's great. And if you're going down the road, ask you this question this way: if you're a salesperson going down the road, and you're thinking, where would I stop that probably might be an opportunity to sell helium?
Mm-hmm.
If you had your quick bullet point list, if I did rapid fire, to you, what would be those spots you say you might want to stop in?
Well, I mean, certainly, any kind of party store, anything like that, any kind of supermarket that is doing balloons, any kind of welding, operation, uh, any company that's involved in leak detection,
That's a good one.
any kind of chemical, refinery or production facility that's going to be using helium for analytical applications. Uh, there can be new lifting applications. There's quite a bit of research going on with aerostats and things like dirigibles that are not, not the Goodyear blimp, but the, uh, uh, aerostats that could be used for surveillance or heavy lifting. There even regional transportation. There's quite a bit of activity in that area. I know it's one of those. It's another one of those areas where there's been a lot of talk and research, and it feels like, it's always 3 years away, 5 years away.
Right.
But some of those things are uh, maturing,
Okay.
and there are some commercial orders for uh, uh, airships for regional transportation, like in the UK.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
and there are some advantages to an airship that can lift off vertically and land vertically. You don't need a giant airport to use this kind of transportation. You don't have to drive an hour to get to the airport. There's a lot of convenience elements for, instead of New York to Boston or New York to Washington. Maybe an airship might be a way to go.
Yeah. Wow.
So we'll see. But that's an area, uh, somebody as well known as Sergey Brin is putting a lot of money into a company called LTA Research that is, very serious about using airships for disaster recovery and things like that.
Okay.
So, I
Interesting.
mean, it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. So we have the great news is that there's a lot of future opportunity in the helium market. There's a lot of material and product available, and there's some fragility that might happen in the actual distribution of it. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of opportunity. It's not a reducing opportunity for distributors. It's going to be a growing opportunity.
I hope so. I think, I hope that's the case.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's great.
Phil, in the new market, since going from um, very difficult to access helium to now you're saying it's there, it's fine, there's plenty to access. What is that price trend looking like?
Okay. So pricing is really, I'd say it's really complicated right now. But, one thing I would say is, if you're looking at plentiful supply over an extended period, I would expect the long-term trend in price to be down. That being said, there is, Exxon has put through a pretty big price increase for January 1st. You would say, well, why are they putting through a big price increase now when the market's gone to oversupply? Well, the January 1st price adjustment is uh, indexed to an RFQ process that Exxon conducted in early 2023 when the shortage was still going strong. So that the pass through of that uh, uh, result of the RFQ process, it has resulted or is resulting in a big price increase for Exxon's large customers January 1st. And, my expectation is that they will be trying to pass that price increase through to their customers early in the year. So even though like the longer term trend might be down, I do believe there's going to be let's say a counter trend uh, attempt to increase price in the early part of the year. So I do think many distributors will have already seen price increase notices from some of the some of the helium majors. Um, what I would say is that it's an environment where the margins in the helium business for especially for the helium majors grew to very high levels during the shortages, and I think it's inevitable that with through the combination of their costs going up and pushback from their customers, that those margins are going to be shrinking this year, even if they do get price increases. I think it'll be difficult to pass through all the price increase they get from Exxon. And yeah, I think the longer term trend will be down. The other thing that I would say about price is, most distributors traditionally have not looked at buying directly from a source, from a producer. And some of the more aggressive ones, who are a little more commercially aggressive, they have dipped their toe into buying directly from companies like an IACX or an NTEC or a Desert Eagle or a North American Helium, and that can be an option to try to manage your cost and try to bring your costs down. The other thing that I would say, I mean, just in general, a broad brush classification of the market. It was a seller's market during Helium Shortage 4.0, a strong seller's market. Basically, whatever price people said that, tried to increase your price to, this is the new price, take it or leave it.
Mhm.
Sorry, but that's the story. We're allocating, et cetera, and so forth. My view is that we're now in a buyer's market, and so it's an opportunity for maybe distributors to win a little more in some of those negotiations. So without being specific about numbers or anything like that, um, I would say it's a buyer's market in 2024. Uh, there's this blip in price counter trend early in the year, but it still should be a largely a buyer's market. And don't be afraid to look around.
I love that. Yep. You're able to think a little bit differently and potentially go direct. So that's exciting for a distributor.
Mhm.
Well, Phil, I got to tell you, I was looking forward to today's podcast, and gosh, I'm even more excited than I came onto it with all the conversation, what can be and what we could do. And I think many of the distributors out there will find this really insightful and answer a lot of questions. I think a lot of distributors will find this really insightful because there's been a lot of reverberation out there, whether there's going to be a shortage, whether it's going to be available, and what the long-term opportunity could be. So I think this really we know it's down to at least a third generation away until we're going to run out of helium. So we're pretty good about making some long-term plans. Phil, thank you so much for being on the High Pressure Podcast. Can't thank you enough for being here.
My pleasure. And I just want to wish both you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And hopefully you enjoy the holidays with your families.
Absolutely. You too, Phil.
You same.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right. Wow. George, I know you get very excited about anything atmospheric gases. You talk about helium, cryogenics, whatever it is, you get going. So I know you enjoyed that podcast. One thing I want to talk about is the offering of RPV valves at Radman Manufacturing and how that benefits our customers who are distributors when it comes to helium. So would you mind touching on that?
Yeah, what's really great about the RPV valve is that essentially you don't have to pull the same amount of vacuums to clean up the cylinder before filling it, because it keeps a certain amount of pressure in the tank, and it also doesn't allow impurities back into the tank. So there's a big savings when you talk about purging a tank and you need to put, let's say, up to 500 psi and then emptying out the tank. That's a lot of gas coming back out. When you have a gas that's as expensive as helium, and sometimes, as in the past particularly, an allocation, you have a shortage, that's a big deal. The RPV valve is a very small investment. It's in the tank for 5-10 years or longer and functioning for you. So it's a very small investment versus the amount of gas that you potentially would be going through each time you fill it to purge the tank. It's just really a wonderful way to bring more profit to the bottom line and also ensure that you have quality, pure helium.
Absolutely. And I would say all of our large customers have converted to the RPV valve for helium. I know in Europe, that's pretty much their standard across the board is going to RPV valves to make sure.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll add something else to that. It's not just helium. I mean, once you've got a more expensive gas, and you're trying to have a purity factor, argon's a wonderful application for it as well. We're for a lot of people welding and TIG welding and different applications for that with argon. It is an absolute, I would say, is absolute must if you use your RPV valve for the long-term investment of what that'll do for you.
And CO2, if you're out there dealing with customers with beverage CO2 or whatever the case may be, where it's something that we're actually consuming, let's put an RPV valve on there and make sure that we're not getting impurities into that tank. So, that's
an outstanding one, because you could have syrup and other things back up to the tank, possibly, and then you have having other reactions within the tank, and so there's a lot of have to now clean a tank. So that's an absolutely wonderful application for RPV valve.
Absolutely.
Residual,
so now
it's RPV valve, residual pressure valve.
Exactly. So now everyone knows that George doesn't just get excited about gases, but also gets equally excited about RPV valves. So
I do. I pretty much get excited about anything with this industry. I get pretty excited.
That's very true. He will talk for hours and hours with big ideas around that. So if you have a story to share, reach out to us. But if you're interested in our Sherwood RPV valve line, also reach out to us and we will walk you through what those cost savings are for your team.
Yeah, and actually, if anybody's had a really cool application that they've used an RPV valve, then that'd be great to hear about too. We could talk about that.
Yeah, I would love that. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for watching. Stay up to date with the latest news in the gas and welding industry by clicking on the subscribe button.
And check out one of our other videos to learn more. Find out more about Reliably Ratterman at rmiordered.com.